Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world and the chaos that is cybersecurity. I'm coming to you live from Northeast Ohio, where I am frozen to my core. It decided to start snowing yesterday, and that was a good day. I know Kayla and I both have been, on the road, traveling all over the place, doing great things with the community here. So welcome to Criticality Live, presented to you by Secure Nation. It's a show where we cut through the noise, challenge assumptions, and talk honestly about the state of cybersecurity today and where we're going to be in the future. So, enough about where we've been. Let's cut to the chase and talk about who we're really here to see. Everyone in cybersecurity loves talking about tools. The latest new flashy thing that's RSA that's coming up next week, the new thing coming out of Black Hat. But what we often kind of forget about is the tools don't matter if our infrastructure is broken.
Mm.
And today's guest has been building the backbone of what a lot of people don't even realize they depend on: power and research at universities, education, cyber capabilities across an entire state. So while others are debating whether it's a framework or this new shiny tool, he's enabling the environments where real cybersecurity work happens. This is what it looks like when you stop talking and actually start building. So with that, I want to welcome Lonnie Leger to the show.
Hey, Joshua. Good to be joining you this morning.
Yeah, happy to have you here, and happy to have someone else from the great state of Louisiana with the show.
That's great. Nice to meet you, Lonnie.
Nice to meet you, Kayla.
So we like to start, all of these segments relatively straightforward with an origin story. So I want to start at the beginning, and because nobody just wakes up one day and says, I'm going to build a statewide infrastructure and shape cybersecurity at that level. So was there a moment, a path, or something, even an accident that just pulled you into the IT? Was there a specific moment that actually kind of said, this is what you want? Or were you like a lot of us and just kind of fell into it because you were just at the right place at the right time, or wrong time, depending on your perspective?
Well, back in 2000 and I want to say it's like 14, I want to say, um, we started seeing movement in the state of creating a uh, cybersecurity committee within the legislative body of the state. And it moved through higher ed as the education task force, right, of training up, new up and coming, graduates in the workforce demands and, the job opening. So it was very workforce oriented. Then it moved through its evolution, and ultimately, a few years later, got other people involved. And as a result, we looked at it and looking at the landscape as everyone was doing nationally as we're getting into 2020 here. That's a service model that looks rather interesting. We could potentially play a vital part and our part in the whole cogwheel of cybersecurity, and not just really in an educational initiative, but actually in a service model, a service delivery initiative. So that's, and then we just kept throwing, if you would, things at the wall to see what would stick, and ultimately with the right leadership that was coming out of that committee within higher education in that LSU, and of course in the governorship, it just aligned that there was symmetry and there was a commonality, common vision, a common outcome that can be achieved. And through partnering with the state office of IT and encapsulating what the state could do as a whole, what they're doing within the state umbrella of agencies, we just leverage that collaboration, and we got things funded and initiated on it.
That's fantastic. And I will say, I did just switch coffee. I did have a blue mug. Now I have. So if anyone is watching, it's not like for continuity purposes. I will acknowledge that. Um, but that's really interesting because to me, the collaboration piece is something I always talk about. I really think it's important. And on top of that, I think that experimentation, like you just said, we're throwing things at the wall and we're seeing what sticks
Mhm.
because you have to try, like, ever since we're kids, you fall off your bike, you scrape your knee, you get up, you get
Mhm.
back on, get back on the bike and the horse, whatever it might be. So what did those early days actually look like then? Like, were you hands-on just building, breaking, fixing, and then learning and then looping back? Like,
Well, initially it was ideas.
oh, okay.
When you're thinking about how to deliver on any kind of new service, well, what's the market going to bear? Do you have support from others beyond, your own thought of what is right? What seems proper, what seems fitting, but a lot of times it's the timing of things. So at times it's having a much longer viewpoint or perspective, because I could wish a whole lot of things, but it necessarily means it comes through fruition the time that I think is the most proper. So it takes time to develop a complex system that never existed before. And this, for us, this is a new complex system that we ended up, launching. So it was a lot of spreadsheets of just figuring out what was the potential cost model for this kind of endeavor, and talking about benefits, talking about value, uh, honing in on all those three aspects until there was, personnel, both political and personal capital from the right kinds of folks that bought into those three different buckets and made things move. And when they decided to be moved, and that's what's interesting, is getting somewhat prepared that when it came, we had some background underneath our feet to move quickly.
Yeah, it's a major transformation.
Yes, ma'am.
And honestly, the groundwork that you guys have laid has kind of led to some of the innovations that we're bringing into the state with the data centers over in Monroe, the data centers that they're putting here in Shreveport, Bossier City area. They're here because of the optical network that your folks did. So, kind of thinking about, you built this big thing. Did you ever have a moment where you kind of went, "Oh crap, this broke and it failed and it went completely sideways"? And what did you learn from that?
Well, I can say for most of for the 20 years I was there, I would say that it rarely happened. So we've
Wow,
been quite fortunate.
knock on wood.
Yeah, we built the right kinds of resiliencies that are necessary in a commercial endeavor. So we really took that approach into how we were going to do it from a public entity standpoint, public agency standpoint. Now, don't get me wrong, we had our share of um, you know unforeseen events due to weather, due to people's you know impact on our network that we can't control, surely, but it wasn't inherently designed that way nor inherently operated that way. We didn't go down through Katrina. We didn't go down through other mishaps.
Wow.
So we were fortunate. Sometimes, as my dad would say, it's better to be lucky than good. And I'll take those wins every day.
Well, I feel like that forethought though, it's more than that luck. I mean, you knew based off of, like geography, experience, like you already had that knowledge of what could potentially happen, there. So like I guess for you, like when did security stop being part of IT and become something that you took seriously? Because clearly it was there. If you didn't go down during Katrina, like the worst disaster from a hurricane that hit, the South Coast in a long time. That's forethought. That's not luck.
Well, I appreciate that. So I would say that, yeah, you're right. There's a mixture of, geography, experience, and an understanding, that led to that. So when did it change? It changed for us, or changed for you specifically. You know, we make the investments, um, as obviously as any good practitioner does in a for-profit industry, to look at the value and the cost model and so forth. And it changed for me when I was seeing how the federal government, how the states across the nation were in looking to invest in cybersecurity, looking to how they could add a level of value to their service model. And from that point, that's where the shift for me is, and then how to move the organization in order to capitalize on when the alignment comes, that and at times we could do those things in small increments. Maybe it's just ourselves and our internal, that we can do. But once you get some capitalization on those ideas and alignment, as we had with security and the cybersecurity center that was launched, it moved rather quickly. Historically, I would say rather quickly. Honestly, that's an honest, because within about a span of 2 years, the Security Operations Center was covering for us about better than 80% of our customer base.
Wow, that's enormous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's massive growth in a very, very short period of time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
so kind of thinking through that, a lot of people come into this space through either, you know, operating tools, building tools, or through the compliance side in GRC. But your path was a little bit different because you came up in kind of that pure infrastructure side. How
right.
did that shape the way that you think about cybersecurity differently than most other practitioners view it?
Yeah. So that's a very good question, Joshua. You're right. None of my team came from the aspects of a cybersecurity practitioner role. We came from a network service delivery, viewpoint and service model. So that's why it was a great asset to have some CISOs around the state, within the state, that we could rely upon and provide us some insights that we lacked. And one of them was, as fast and as much as we wanted to do, we really need to find a public-private partnership in order to make that happen.
Yeah.
We felt like we wanted to use the funding wisely and not just invest in, I should say, a capability solely within the public domain, but we needed that private assistance to move quickly and be nimble, because nothing in the state had been created like this before. And to move that quickly, we thought it was a beneficial and almost necessary capacity for us to take.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, coming up the infrastructure side, you probably had a lot of that operational resilience
Mm-hmm.
inherently at the top of mind, which has really, you've seen a lot more of this ops res, or whatever the term is now, being really prevalent these days. So the forethought that we mentioned before, from back when you're designing this, clearly shows this influence from that infrastructure side, and then bringing in these CISOs and other experienced cybersecurity professionals clearly influenced what was going on at the time. So was there a mentor or a leader or just like a person that you had worked with, that's kind of helped shape how you approach technology and leadership today?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, the CISO at LSU, the CIO at LSU. I mean, and really in the cyber officer with the state. All three of them brought in unique, perspectives. And each of for us, since we served mostly predominantly higher education in Louisiana, that their perspective, because before we got into cyber, they had been dealing with cyber long before we had. They had obviously pain points all along their way, and so our ability and for just us to be, I mean, we had all of those became channels, I would say, in the end for us, our listening channels, if you would, such that we could be honest. I'm a pretty transparent person. To say that we're not going to be able to take on your risk. You still own your risk. I cannot do that, even though that's this idea sounds so wonderful. There's certain things that just we can't do. So we had to set the right expectations and be honest with them, and be assuring that we could do things that we could, and obviously declare things that we were not going to do, we couldn't do.
Yep.
But we gave them, hopefully was the goal, a clean channel of information that was actionable, it had a high fidelity, that was coming from a trusted source, right? It could have been coming also, we use this concept of, it's much like a community watch program that you might have in your neighborhood. Your neighbors watch out for you, and though you might have an off-duty policeman that might be, surveilling the neighborhood, but it comes down to taking all of those inputs. So as a neighborhood watch, even things that we learn from each other, from the other, let's say, our member institutions, that became valuable to provide us, maybe attack awareness, attack communications to the others, how we might be able to pivot from things that we're seeing maybe in as real time as we can be, and what controls and knobs that we can turn. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that information sharing is pivotal to any organization's success. So I love to hear that.
So, just so we can get some context, I've lived in Louisiana since 2006, and I just heard about the Louisiana Optical Network Infrastructure probably within the last 2 years. So, can you tell us what it is? How big is it? And we're talking like miles and miles of fiber, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So in 2004, just before Katrina, then Governor Blanco endorsed an investment in higher education to build an infrastructure that interconnected those. It began as a research project, a compute research project, to connect these institutions together, and ultimately, hopefully, getting funding to supplant and import a computational instrument, a supercomputer, if you would, into that fabric. That way, institutions don't have to fund that kind of an investment, thereby the state in funding in each individual institution having their own capability. and the network as well, and connecting to the internet and social research networks nationally. So the state decided that we would basically combine our efforts of buying power and develop and put this together. So yes, through a myriad of our own constructed routes and lease routes, we've got about 1,600 miles that the organization manages and delivers services over. And then I think we're in our fourth generation of dramatic, improvements in technology along the way, both on the network side, getting up to 400 gig, as well as, just last year, deploying our AI supercomputer for the state, which is designed again to capitalize on, research funding to advance research and needing those specific tools. So much like in cyber, we decided same kind of model, instead of the state trying to figure out how to fund cybersecurity at this level and this concept of a security operations center at every institution, is to build one monolithic one, much like the network, much like the supercomputer, and then be able to serve each of the institutions just as effectively as we've done in those other two assets.
Wow. So I guess, for me, what stands out is that you didn't just grow in IT, you grew into leadership in like environments where the stakes are real. We're talking about infrastructure, institutions, and systems that people genuinely depend on from a day-to-day perspective. And leadership at that level, in my opinion, hits very differently. So I kind of want to shift gears a little bit here from what you've built to how you lead.
Mm.
So when you stepped into leadership roles, supporting statewide infrastructure, what changed for you personally? Like, what did you have to unlearn to be effective?
Probably the thing that I had to unlearn is my willingness to give up the keyboard.
Ah.
Number one.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm with you.
Yeah, it's hard. It is.
It's hard. I had to give it up. And then the second, not too so long after that, is equipping the staff to be as self-sufficient as I thought I was. I think I was pretty self-sufficient in that regard.
Yeah.
So those two things come hand in hand. After I've done this for so long, and all the experience and certifications and everything else, I needed to make sure that at least the staff has a pathway to be what I consider just as successful if they chose to do that. Because eventually, which has turned out to be the case, I retired. And eventually somebody's going to have to take the reins and going to have to keep moving the goalpost, because the goalpost keeps moving. Because especially in cyber, it is a tremendously emerging, shifting, diaposing, a subject matter. And you got to be able to have people that's going to continue delivering regardless, of who is really in the seats. And typically in education and in public sector, at least in my experience, these institutions are 100 years old. They have a very long, believe it or not, viewpoint on things. I know, football and basketball have short-term memories on coaches and impacts in that way. But the institution, as an institution, has a very long perspective on things. And it's critical. It's called continuance of government and all those kinds of aspects that are probably no different in governance models in the private sector. So those are important. So that was the two things probably I had to learn and be willing to do.
So, having kind of sat in adjacent type roles, you've operated where you're talking and partnering with education, with researchers, with state and local government, the cybersecurity folks. You have multiple stakeholders, you have multiple different priorities, multiple different funding sources. How did you make decisions when everyone's version of what mission critical is wildly different?
Yeah, I would say, in general, everyone's viewpoint of what needs to get funded, right, or your appropriations. There's no short of need, Joshua.
Mhm.
I would say that, and as a result, we've been lucky. I would say that it's amazing that what little funding we've gotten over the years for our capability, in comparison to others across the nation. So we've lived on just the crumbs that fall off the table, and you got to be aggressive with those crumbs you get, and you got to be thankful that you get them. And and the success that comes with delivering keeps the breadcrumbs from continuing to fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are feeling that, particularly in 2026, where a lot of businesses are tightening the belt a little bit, and the money that was freely flowing into cybersecurity because it was the hot button issue is rapidly drying up, and looking at ways to do better with less money is huge. And you know obviously you've led the way on how to do that in a way that is repeatable and actually gets the mission done.
Yes, I see that, in what you're referring to in the broad sense, right? In the broad market sense. And my advice is, you, you can't do too much. You can't be. You got to do Chick-fil-A style approach to service sometimes. You got to have one love. Um, I'm not saying it has to be so singular, right? But it has to be focused enough that when things are difficult, you can weather.
Hmm. So how do you carry that level of responsibility then without it impacting how you lead your team? I mean, very clearly, the blast radius is real in what you're doing.
Well, I can't say that I've been perfect about it. That's for sure. I'm human. I've got my frailties and emotional, baggage associated with it as well. Um, I think for me, it was personally is getting back to what I said earlier, transparency. Um, I'm just wired that way. I think my parents instilled that in me as being, small entrepreneurs, both of them, in running their own separate companies and understanding what it meant to deal with people, and deal in a commerce setting, right? So this is all still in a commerce setting, regardless if it's public dollars or private dollars. And that's what we chose to do. Is that I chose to manage it as though it was a private enterprise as best I could. From balancing my books every month to being accountable to my customers and treating them as customers. So how do you do it? You got to have you got to have vision. And I'll say maybe a little bit different way. You might have heard that said often. You got to have belief. You got to have belief in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the most important thing, maybe not to the end customer, but to yourself. You have to believe that this is what is just true and right, and that it's your North Star. Because otherwise, you're going to be tossed about.
I think that's great advice, though, for everything, personally and professionally.
Yep.
I think that's so solid, and thank you for saying that. I like that.
So, kind of leading in on that, obviously in infrastructure, cybersecurity, and IT as a whole, it's impossible to micromanage everything. At some point you have to take your hands off the keyboard and let somebody else do something. How do you build trust in your teams while still maintaining the level of accountability that we have to have as leaders, particularly when you're dealing with tax dollars and grants from the federal government?
Let's see. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is telling the staff frequent and often is that I will never ask them to do anything that I've not done myself or not willing to do myself. From the menial task of getting a splice fault and working that cable to deploying a new 400 gig network, activating an AI cluster, upgrading the power, cooling. I mean, that's I think number one. You have to show that you're willing, you still are willing to do the work that is necessary to continue the operations, regardless of how small it is. Which means you got to sacrifice. You got to sacrifice. And then constantly, in being the one, and this is my experience, I can't speak for anyone else, obviously, but it is demonstrating through that, not just words, but the practice of actually doing it in front of them, hopefully encourages them this is the right thing to do. And the practice of doing it is going to be necessary for your work career. And instilling in them, like I said earlier, instructing them, done an awful lot of show and tell, done an awful lot of whiteboarding, an awful lot of lab, an awful lot of work assignments that had nothing to do with getting work done per se, but had everything to do with building a capacity within the staff, so that your time doing those trenched activities become less. But then I got to the point where I enjoyed going back out in the field because I missed it too, and ever so often they would allow me to do so, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. Even during my time when I was active duty, I had a rule that, you know, my airmen don't take out my trash. I take out my own trash. And it was one of those things, it was so dumb, so simple. But I had airmen talk to me years afterwards just saying that was a huge impact for them because it showed them that I wasn't above them. And like you, I always had a toolkit. And when I thought I could sneak out, I'd go grab a ticket and grab my toolkit and go work on a job. And then I inevitably get yelled at. You're supposed to be here managing things and not fixing computers. But, you know, sometimes you have to get out in the field and get your hands dirty just to stay in touch with everyone.
Yes, for me it was the human touches, connectivity, both with the staff that I might not have seen as often as I would have liked or could, but also my vendors, the partners, and obviously my clients. So yeah, what what unfortunately happens is that you are forced into this conclave of being so far from your analogy of the military, so far from the battlefield that it's all just virtual. And at times it's necessary, and then sometimes it is it is unpleasant. It's just downright unpleasant for me.
Yeah, without a doubt. Love everything you're saying. So we've talked a little bit about leadership, but that's only part of the puzzle. You know, in the world that you came from, if the technical foundation isn't right, none of it matters. You know, if
Correct.
the flashes of light don't go down the fiber optic cable,
Right.
it's not going to do what we need it to do. So you've operated at the layer most people never see. You know, high speed networks, research environments, infrastructure that everything else sits on top of. You know, it's not theory. It's where performance, security, and reality really kind of collide together. So when you're designing or involving these kinds of infrastructures at scale the way you are, and you're looking at things, not just what you need now, but what you need, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what are the kind of things you look at that are non-negotiable things that you have to do right on day one?
Ooh. So I think there's a couple of different train tracks, pathways here to answer your question, and hopefully I may be able to answer, but I may ramble, so bear with me. As I mentioned before, you have the clients that you're serving. I mean, the most challenging part of this whole endeavor is not technical. It is communications. Did they understand what you were trying to say? Did they even pick up on what you were trying to say? Okay, so I mean, by far, to diagnose a technical matter, retrofit it, temporary, permanent fix, greenfield or whatever. Those are the things that I expect myself and others to be non-negotiable. These things that you should be prepared, or I am willing to prepare you because you've come with enough of foundation and understanding that you can be teachable. And I've taught countless in my career. But the communications is the single most coveted, both from the speaker and from the hearer. And good communications is it's everyone's dream to be able to speak clearly, write clearly, and to be heard and interpreted. Whew. To me, that's the most difficult challenge of this. Everything else, it's a math problem. Math is pretty simple. You may not be able to do it when you want to, or it may not necessarily turn out like you wanted to, but the percentages of math that comes down in the technical is it one or two standard deviations of where you thought you were going to be at? Is it worse than that? Well, you can figure out how to compensate. It's math. Communications and interpersonal skills is by far the most difficult and challenging to build and retain and recruit for. So I'm not trying to say that the math isn't complex. I'm not saying that at all. There's very few people, in this industry as a whole that can design the internet and run the internet, right? There's not that many, right? So it takes a right kind of person, a skilled person to do that. And we got a couple, and we took those three, and we started, and we built capacity internally to manage it. But it just, in the end, Josh, I'm not trying to, like I said, undercut or undervalue the success and the complexity, but at the same time, I find it not so uniquely marveling. I think anybody can, as I tell many people, several people over the years, if Louisiana can do it, anybody can. Okay. From the cybersecurity approach that we did to anything, it is not that complicated for if it can be done. What is complicated is all the other intangibles. That's the load.
Yeah. And I feel like working with multiple agencies, universities, the stakeholders that support them, these research environments, they often depend on speed and that openness. But cybersecurity demands control. So how do you balance the high performance computing with real security controls?
That's a difficult challenge, right? So we have to have the right kinds of inputs to the system. There are some things that where our listening channels are, right? What are our inputs that we're taking into? And a lot of the control is a big part of the specific side of cyber security that, in my experience, was like the telephone set when we moved from land-based POTS lines and the telephone instrument to a VoIP instrument, which was totally different in delivery.
Yep.
And people were very attached to that device, of how it operates. Now we're a little bit more, Apple is in other phones mobile. It's kind of just, kind of eroded that because, we're getting new phones every 2 years, right? But back then, you didn't get a new phone. So giving up control was a transformational for users. And the users in this case that we're talking about are IT people. And they are even as or more in control freaks than others. So we basically had to constantly communicate what our control point was, where we stopped and where they took over. We had to, and then it blurred. Where does cybersecurity end is a motto here. I don't know. It seems like it's so pervasive. Like we have customers that are, I should say, equipped, and then we have others that are less equipped. So how do we deal with those complexities of imbalance of where, we have those that can take that control and do it and what we expect with it, right? And then we have others that they struggle. They're a much smaller school, much less equipped, right? Whatever that metric is. So we had to kind of prove it. They had to be alongside us, much different than the other services of the two that I mentioned earlier. They had to be with us during the deployment, rollout, and observation, so they could constantly give us feedback where it needed to be tuned, customized, or tweaked for them, for their governance, their policy, their culture, their operations. each one of them. And in doing that, I think we got the recipe right, but we gave them the ability to be comforted as much as we could in that aspect of they're responsible for their campuses. I'm not.
Yeah.
So I had to make sure that they understood that, and where we needed them and where we were providing something that was new, but yet it was not something, again, I could take on their risk, right? They had to still maintain their risk protocol and their risk management. So I felt for them. I really did. I had compassion for, what they were struggling with before we deployed what we were deploying. And even more so afterwards, because I had a little glimpse of how much stress they must be under with the constant bombardment of either a flashing light metaphor, a tweet, a message, an email of something barking at them to saying, you might want to look at this. You might want to investigate this. I'm like, holy cow.
Yeah.
That's so I gave me a bigger appreciation of what their struggles are.
So I kind of want to double click on that a little bit because a lot of organizations treat networking essentially like plumbing. It's just something that's there and it works and it does its thing. How do you think about networking itself as part of a larger active security model versus just something that traffic flows through and you're not really thinking about how it works or why it works?
Well, when we got into research side, we got we got much intimate with the user base, so what they were using it for and why. And the academic a little bit, but more so on the research side. So it gave us some ability to grow an appreciation, though we are still plumbing guys, gals. It's kind of hard to remove that from our DNA, but it definitely gave us, the exposure, the sensitivity of that workforce set, that population that deals with and interfaces it in a unique way. And we've had numerous. We're not immune to cyber threats and cyber consequences. We've had our fair share as a state. And for me, if I can answer the question, how it's in looking at ideas that are probably insane to most people. But one of those same ideas, and I can see it now, is the network in itself could be its own telemetry. In its own, maybe more clearly, it's in its own, and I'm not going to get this formulated right, so bear with me. Clear channel. Because the way we can segmentate the network that we've been doing for 20, 30 plus years, we could provide mechanisms, that allow us to shift to these other segmentations, such that we could offer at least some ability to recover, but yet maybe still have some usability. Or maybe it is a way that we use it as a long reach of dealing with a cyber threat in a clear path way of doing some remote diagnostics, remote control, and things that, we would historically, just a few years ago, would have to ship hard drives around or people around in order to facilitate, an on hands recovery. well, how can we do that differently? Like I said, this is a brainstorming idea that I have. So how, to your question, is looking at the network as not just piping, but as a tool, and looking at it in ways that how could it help a restoration mitigation like activity, and not necessarily do with us at all, in a sense. It's not maybe one of my customers, and maybe is one of my customers, and maybe someone that's not. But yet, in Louisiana, when you draw upon, well, ES-17 kind of went away with the emergency response under the governor's office of Homeland Preparedness, but in that whole government approach to an activity like that, it's just a tool, to help whomever potentially recover from, because there's a lot of critical infrastructure in Louisiana, not just higher education.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got you thinking.
Yeah, it absolutely does. The critical infrastructure has always been something I've been fascinated with because it is so, it's like a mix of legacy and cutting edge. So I feel like there's a lot of what ifs in those types of scenarios, but we don't have time to go into all of that. I don't think. So,
Subject for another day.
well, Lonnie, we always end Criticality Live with a set of core questions that give our audience those practical, take it with you insights that they can hopefully use right away. So my first question for you is, if you could fix one thing about cybersecurity industry overnight, what would it be?
Man, one thing. Well, the pressure's not on, huh? Maybe. My mind goes to money, and from my perspective in the public sector, like I mentioned, it's just it's everyone is in need, but if we figure out a way between the parties involved to turn some of these capital intensive projects into operating expenses, as in higher education's perspective, tuition comes twice a year, and that's more of an operating income and not a capital income. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying it fixes it, but I would say a mixture, or at least a strong ability for the industry to help that kind of organizations deal with the investment complexities that they deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
So from my perspective, what's a practice? It can be a technical one or a cultural one that you wish organizations would just stop doing right now, and that would move the needle on, IT and cybersecurity in the org.
Stop doing. Oh man, stop doing. That's a really good one. Stop doing. Oh, I probably, I can always, again, speak from my experience in my realm in the last 20 years. I would say in the way we hire, the way we go about the process that HR confines us to, and I wouldn't say necessarily confines is maybe a bad word, but has a monolithic model about how to hire anyone and everyone. I wish they would stop that kind of approach, and also for the ones that are going to be taking on the responsibility. I think I think the marketplace needs to be ready for would need to be ready for a change for that to happen. So.
Yep. Yeah.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, we've talked about the hiring struggles for quite some time, Josh and I have. So we wholeheartedly agree there. So for our listeners who want to follow your work or reach out to you, what's the best way to connect with you?
LinkedIn. I'm Lonnie Leger on LinkedIn, and that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. I'm on there, and in fact, that's how I got reached out by John and his team.
That's great.
All right. So before we let you go, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with our audience on cybersecurity and infrastructure leadership, building resilience in 2026 beyond, anything that you're working on that you want to promote and tell us all the great things you're doing?
Oh, well, thank you. For me personally, I think I'm trying to figure out, what does life look like with AI on a practical sense. We have got a vast number of small businesses in our country, 10 people or less, and many of them a single member. And so that's what I'm thinking about these days is those individuals or small groups don't have the resources, they may not need it. So how can they be equipped to take on that challenge? Though it may improve their life, their productivity, but it is going to be a challenge and if that's an example of a large population group, it is going to be an untapped marketplace, I believe.
Yeah, I think the last stat I seen was 60% of all businesses in the US are small to medium businesses. So to your point, it's a huge, huge market segment.
Yeah, very underserved. I completely agree.
Yeah,
across the board.
Yeah, enterprise seems to be enough. Enterprise would be applying to a large private, or public agency or entity, but the small shops, and if you think about that, does that translate to individuals as well? Probably, right? Because most of them are made up of 5 to 10 people or less. So, yeah, and then both the ethical and security practices that they probably don't understand, and they don't, maybe understand the unintended consequences either. In dealing with these new technologies and whatever else it might come down the road, robotics, who knows?
Yeah.
We already did. Yeah, just that's going to be a big market.
Well, you heard it here first, everyone.
Sure.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Criticality Live. Huge thanks to our guests, Lonnie Leger, and an even bigger thanks to you for hanging out with us and being a part of this growing community of leaders who are done with buzzwords and are ready for this real conversations. If you got value out of today's episode, please hit that follow button, share it with someone you know, and drop us a review here on LinkedIn, Spotify, or on our on-demand YouTube channel. And of course, a huge shout out to our sponsor, Secure Nation, for powering this conversation. They're helping organizations defend smarter, respond faster, and make cybersecurity something that actually works. So go check them out. This has been Criticality Live, where we cut through the noise and get to what really matters. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.